Most mornings started the same way. I arrived early, before the elevators grew loud and before the office filled with voices. The building was quiet at 6:45 a.m., the kind of quiet that made you feel like work was something private, almost respectful. I liked that hour. It gave me time to review the overnight reports, skim the compliance alerts, and prepare for meetings without interruption. That morning was no different. I set my briefcase down at my desk, poured myself a cup of burnt office coffee, and opened the same leather-bound notebook I'd carried for years. It wasn't fancy. No logo, no embossing, just a black cover, soft at the edges from use. Inside were dates, reminders, follow-ups, and observations I didn't trust myself to remember later. It was where I wrote things that didn't belong in emails. I didn't know yet that the notebook would matter more than anything else that day. By 8 o'clock, the office had woken up. Phones rang, printers hummed, people gathered around glass-walled conference rooms holding paper cups and talking about weekend plans. It was the last week before the holidays, which meant productivity was already halfway out the door. Everyone was counting days. At 8:30 I received the calendar reminder, executive breakfast, conference room B. It was marked as informal, no agenda attached. Those were usually the most important meetings. I closed the notebook, slid it into my bag, and walked down the hall. Conference room B overlooked the parking lot. Winter light filtered in through the windows, pale and thin. A long table sat in the center, already laid out with pastries, fruit, and coffee carafes. The atmosphere was deliberately relaxed. No laptops, no screens, just executives pretending for an hour that hierarchy didn't exist. Our CEO sat at the head of the table, already chatting with two board members. Across from him sat my sister-in-law, Jacqueline, who technically worked in external relations, though no one could quite explain what that meant. Next to her was her son, Frank, who had recently joined the company as a junior associate under a special internship arrangement. I took my seat quietly. I had been with the company for 8 years, long enough to see restructures, mergers, quiet exits, and louder ones. My role sat in operations, risk management, compliance oversight, internal controls. Not glamorous, but necessary. The kind of work that only became visible when it failed. That was fine with me. Frank was the opposite. He was visible, athletic, confident. The kind of young man executives like to mentor publicly. He talked easily, laughed loudly, and had never once asked how things worked behind the scenes. As people settled in, the CEO stood and tapped his glass lightly. "Before we get into the year-end numbers," he said, smiling, "we wanted to do something a little special." That sentence landed softly, no tension yet. He gestured toward a slim silver folder on the table. "Frank," he said, "this is for you." Frank straightened, surprised but clearly pleased. He accepted the folder, opened it, and scanned the contents. His eyebrows lifted. Then he smiled. Inside were travel documents. A 3-week overseas leadership immersion program, Europe, fully funded. Flights, accommodations, cultural tours, a line-item investment approved at the board level. "This," the CEO continued, "is what we mean when we talk about investing in potential." There were nods around the table, quiet approval, the kind of moment designed to inspire. Frank thanked everyone, modest but practiced. Jacqueline beamed. Phones discreetly came out to capture the moment. Then the CEO turned his attention toward me. "And for you," he said, sliding a small package across the table. Something different. It was wrapped plainly. No logo, no ribbon. I opened it slowly. Inside was a used book. The cover was worn. The title read something about humility and long-term thinking. The pages were marked with someone else's notes. The CEO smiled kindly. "A reminder," he said, "that real leadership starts with gratitude. Not everyone gets fast tracks. Some roles are about quiet service." There was a murmur of agreement. I closed the book and placed it carefully on the table. I said nothing. Silence, I'd learned, was more instructive than argument. The meeting moved on, numbers were discussed, targets reviewed. I took notes in my leather notebook, writing dates and phrases, not reacting outwardly. When the meeting ended, people filtered out, energized, satisfied. I returned to my desk and resumed work. But something had shifted. By lunchtime, an email arrived from finance. Routine on the surface. A minor change in approval workflows. Nothing alarming. I noted it in the notebook. Later that afternoon, compliance flagged a clause amendment in an internal policy update. Again, routine. I noted it. Small changes, quietly accumulating. That evening, I left the office on time. I picked up my son from school, helped him with homework, made dinner. Life continued. Normal. Calm. But before bed, I opened the notebook again. I reread my notes from the morning. The words investing in potential circled once, underlined twice. I didn't feel angry. I felt alert. Some lessons arrive disguised as gestures. Some warnings arrive wrapped in courtesy. I closed the notebook, placed it on the nightstand, and turned off the light. Whatever was coming, I knew it wouldn't announce itself loudly. It never did. The days after the breakfast unfolded without incident. That, in hindsight, was the point. In well-run organizations, consequences rarely arrive with raised voices or dramatic exits. They move through calendars, approvals, and quiet decisions made in rooms you're not invited into. I had spent years helping design those systems. I knew how patience worked inside them. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office at the same time as always. The leather notebook came out. The coffee tasted the same. No one mentioned the breakfast. Frank walked past my desk mid-morning, talking loudly into his phone about passport photos and luggage sizes. He waved casually, as if we were equals navigating parallel paths. I nodded back. By noon, a meeting invite appeared on my calendar. Policy alignment review, attendance required. No explanation, no agenda. Organized by legal. I wrote the time down in the notebook. The meeting room was smaller than usual, windowless. Legal meetings often were. 4 people sat at the table when I arrived. A senior counsel, a compliance officer, a risk analyst, and someone from HR taking notes. No executives. The counsel began without preamble. As part of the upcoming international expansion, she said, we're tightening internal delegation authorities, specifically financial sponsorships, internships, and leadership placements involving family members. She spoke evenly, professionally. We'll need operations to verify that all current arrangements meet the updated conflict of interest thresholds. She slid a folder across the table toward me. My name was already on the sign-off line. I flipped through the documents slowly. Clauses I recognized, language I'd helped draft years earlier, now resurfacing with subtle revisions. Nothing radical, just clearer boundaries, less discretion, more documentation. I'll review and revert, I said. That was all that was required. The meeting ended in under 20 minutes. Back at my desk, I opened the leather notebook and wrote a single line. System correction initiated. That afternoon, I received a message from finance asking me to confirm historical payment authorizations tied to Frank's internship program. I forwarded the request to legal and copied compliance, per protocol. No commentary. On Tuesday, HR circulated a memo reminding managers that all mentorship-related travel must be approved by a neutral committee going forward. The language was careful. No names, no accusations. Frank stopped by my desk later that day. Hey, he said, leaning casually against the partition. Quick question, do you know who I talked to about changing my travel dates? The Europe thing? Some of the flights are complicated. I looked up from my screen. I'm not involved in sponsorship logistics, I said. You'll want to check with legal or finance. Oh, he said, surprised. I thought, never mind. He smiled, shrugged, and walked away. That evening, I took a long walk after dinner. No music, no phone, just the quiet rhythm of steps and cold air. I didn't think about the office directly. I thought about patterns, about how often people mistook stability for permanence. On Wednesday, a second meeting invite arrived. Interdepartmental review, mandatory. This one included executives. The CEO sat at the table, relaxed but alert. The board liaison joined via video. Legal presented slides. Finance reviewed numbers. Compliance explained thresholds. No one mentioned the breakfast. Instead, legal concluded with a summary. Effective immediately, she said. Any role, benefit, or financial opportunity involving relatives of senior staff will be suspended pending review. This is standard governance alignment. The CEO nodded. Agreed. There was no dissent. I was asked, briefly, to confirm operational feasibility. It's manageable, I said. Frank wasn't in the room. By Thursday morning, my inbox contained 3 new emails. One from HR requesting documentation. One from finance confirming suspended disbursements. One from Jacqueline asking, informally, if something had changed. I didn't reply. I filed the emails. I noted dates. I updated the notebook. At lunch, I sat alone in a small cafe across the street. I ordered soup and bread. I watched people pass by through the window. Office workers, delivery drivers, students, everyone moving with purpose, or at least momentum. This was the pause, the emotional reset, though I didn't name it that way then. No one was upset yet. That always came later. On Friday afternoon, Frank finally appeared at my desk again, this time without the casual confidence. They told me the trip's on hold, he said. Just temporarily, they said. Do you know why? I closed my notebook. There's a review, I said. Policy related. But it was approved, he insisted. They made a whole thing of it. Yes, I said, and now it's being reviewed. He stood there, unsure what to say next. He waited for reassurance, for intervention. I didn't offer either. Okay, he said finally. Thanks. When he left, I wrote one more line in the notebook. Momentum shifting. No intervention required. I left the office early that day, picked up my son. We stopped for groceries, talked about his science project, ordinary things. At home, after he went to bed, I opened the notebook again. No anger, no satisfaction, just observation. Systems didn't punish, they corrected, and corrections, once started, rarely stopped where people expected them to. By the following week, the office felt different, not louder, not tense, just aware. Conversations lowered when I walked past. People checked calendars more carefully. Requests came with more documentation attached than usual. The system was doing what systems do when they sense scrutiny, tightening quietly. On Monday morning, I received a call from internal audit. Not an accusation, not even a concern, a clarification. They wanted historical context around discretionary approvals issued over the last 3 years. Specifically, travel sponsorships, accelerated internships, and external-facing programs tied to leadership development. They already had the list. They wanted confirmation. I told them I'd send everything by end of day. The leather notebook came out. I didn't need it for memory. I needed it for order. I cross-referenced dates, approvals, exceptions granted in the interest of flexibility. Every organization had those. They were not inherently unethical, but they aged poorly under review. By noon, I sent the files. No commentary, no framing, just data. That afternoon, the CEO asked if I had 5 minutes. His office was glass-walled and immaculate. Minimalist. Intentional. He gestured for me to sit. I'm sensing some unease, he said carefully, around the holiday decisions. I waited. We were trying to model values, he continued, long-term thinking, investment mindset. I understand, I said. He studied my face, looking for something. Reaction, maybe, validation. You've always been steady, he added. That's why we trust you. Trust was an interesting word. It was often used when people meant predictable. I focus on alignment, I said. That's my role. He nodded slowly. We're reviewing some policies, he said. It's procedural, nothing personal. Of course, I replied. The conversation ended there. No apology, no confrontation, none was required. On Tuesday, HR scheduled one-on-ones with several junior staff, including Frank. I learned this not because anyone told me, but because his calendar went suddenly private. By Wednesday, finance froze all discretionary travel budgets pending Q1 reassessment. That memo went company-wide. It mentioned external perception and fiduciary responsibility. The language was neutral. The impact was not. Frank stopped coming by my desk. Jacqueline sent another email, shorter this time. Is there something I should know? I didn't answer. That evening, I stayed late. Not because I had to, but because the building was quiet again. I liked quiet. It let patterns emerge. I sat alone in a conference room and reread the book they'd given me at the breakfast, the used one. I hadn't opened it before. Some of the passages were underlined by a previous owner, notes in the margins, someone else's idea of humility, someone else's definition of gratitude. I closed it and left it on the table. Thursday morning brought the first real sign of impact, an internal announcement. Internship program restructuring, immediate effect. The program Frank was part of was being dissolved into a standardized track. No special placements, no exceptions. Reapplication required. HR framed it as fairness. That afternoon, Frank sent me a message. "Can we talk?" I replied with the time. 15 minutes, glass meeting room, neutral ground. He arrived early, sat stiffly, no smile. "They're saying my role might change," he said. "That I might have to reapply. That I don't meet some criteria now." I waited. "You've been here a long time," he continued. "You know how this works. Is there anything you can do?" There it was. I folded my hands on the table. "This isn't something I control," I said. "It's policy." "But you're part of operations," he pressed. "You sign off on things." "I verify compliance," I said. "I don't override it." He looked down at the table. "I didn't ask for the trip," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. That was true. He hadn't asked. He had simply accepted. Systems rewarded that, until they didn't. When the meeting ended, he thanked me, though there was nothing to thank me for. That night, I didn't work. I went home on time, cooked dinner, helped my son with a model he was building, a small satellite made of cardboard and foil. As we worked, he asked why some things needed rules. "So things don't depend on who someone likes," I said. He nodded, satisfied. Before bed, I opened the notebook one more time. "Authority isn't loud," I wrote. "It's procedural. The next phase wouldn't be immediate. It never was." The first resignation came quietly. It wasn't Frank's. Not yet. It was a mid-level manager in marketing who'd built her team around informal approvals and personal access. When the new review thresholds took effect, her discretionary budget disappeared. 2 weeks later, she accepted a role elsewhere. No farewell email, no announcement, just a calendar vacancy that stayed empty. The system adjusted. By the end of the month, 3 more departments were under audit review, not because of wrongdoing, but because precedent invited consistency. That was how oversight worked. Once you looked closely in one place, you couldn't justify not looking everywhere else. No one blamed me. That was the most important part. The review was framed as modernization, alignment, governance maturity, all language the board liked. I attended meetings, answered questions, provided documentation. I never raised my voice. I never made a case. I let the records speak. Frank's situation remained unresolved. His interim status extended week by week. HR sent polite updates. "Still under review. Pending clarification. Appreciate your patience." He stopped attending optional meetings. His confidence dulled, not dramatically, just enough that people noticed. Jacqueline, however, noticed immediately. She requested a meeting with me late one afternoon, not through the system, a direct message. "Please, just 10 minutes. I agreed. We met in the same glass room where I'd spoken with Frank. She arrived with a smile that didn't settle. "This has gotten out of hand," she said once we sat. "Whatever point you were making, it's been made." I said nothing. "You know how this looks," she continued. "People are talking. Frank's embarrassed. The program was good for him." "It was discretionary," I said. "You're being technical," she replied sharply. "This is family." Family was another interesting word, often used when people meant exception. "The policies don't recognize family," I said. "They recognize structure." She leaned back, exhaled slowly. "You could have said something," she said. "You could have warned us." "I didn't know it would go this far," I replied. That was also true. Systems rarely stopped where people expected. She studied me, as if recalibrating. "You've changed," she said. "No," I replied. "The conditions did." She left without another word. The following week, the CEO announced his departure, not abruptly, not scandalously. He was pursuing opportunities outside the organization. A successor was named internally. The board thanked him for his service. Most people assumed it was unrelated. They were mostly right. Leadership changes create appetite for review. Review uncovers patterns. Patterns force correction. I attended the transition meeting, took notes, asked questions, provided continuity. The new CEO was quieter, less performative. He valued process. That mattered. 2 weeks later, Frank's internship officially ended. HR sent a neutral email outlining options. Reapply next cycle. Explore external roles. No guarantees. Frank packed his desk the same afternoon. He didn't say goodbye to many people. As he passed my desk, he stopped. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said. "Few things do," I replied. He nodded once and left. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment with the leather notebook open on the table. I flipped back through pages, dates, notes, phrases that had felt insignificant at the time. They weren't insignificant. They were context. There was no victory to celebrate, no moment that felt like triumph, just an absence of pressure, an absence of expectation. The phone didn't ring. No one asked me to fix anything. On Friday, the used book appeared on my desk. Someone had placed it there without comment. I slid it into a drawer. Some symbols served their purpose once. By the end of the quarter, the company was leaner, clearer, more cautious. The board praised the governance improvements. The new CEO sent a brief note thanking operations for quiet leadership. I saved the email, not because I needed validation, because documentation mattered. Time did what it always does. It normalized the outcome. Within 3 months, the office had settled into a new rhythm. Fewer informal favors, more written approvals. People adjusted quickly once they realized the rules were real. Most of them preferred it that way. Clarity reduced anxiety. Predictability restored trust. Frank found work elsewhere. Not immediately. There was a gap. I heard through indirect channels that he'd taken a contract role outside the city. Something temporary. Something practical. Jacqueline stopped contacting me. The company's new leadership formalized the review framework into permanent policy. I was asked to help train department heads on implementation. I did so without commentary, no case studies, no references to the past. We didn't need them. One afternoon, while clearing out old files, I found the leather notebook's earliest pages. The handwriting was less confident then, the notes more tentative. I remembered the person I'd been when I started. Careful, quiet, eager not to disrupt. I wasn't that person anymore. Not because I'd grown harder, because I'd learned when not to speak. Near the end of the quarter, I received an email from the former CEO. A personal address. No subject line. "I see now what I missed," it read. "You were never difficult. You were precise. I should have listened earlier. I archived it. Some realizations arrived too late to matter. At home, life remained simple. My son worked on his projects. We cooked together, talked about school, about how systems worked in the world outside textbooks. One evening, he asked why some people seem to move ahead faster than others. Sometimes they do, I said. Sometimes they just move louder. He thought about that, then went back to his work. That night, I sat at the table with the notebook open, though I didn't write anything. It had served its purpose. It always had. The last entry was a date and a phrase. Silence held. Process followed. I closed it and placed it on the shelf. At work, no one referenced the holiday breakfast anymore. New hires didn't know it had happened. The moment had dissolved into policy, which was where moments like that belonged. Power didn't announce itself. It embedded. The satisfaction, if there was any, came from something smaller. Stability. No one depended on me in ways they didn't understand anymore. Expectations were explicit. Boundaries respected. I hadn't taken anything from anyone. I'd simply stopped compensating for imbalance. That was enough. The year ended without ceremony. No final meeting, no closing speech, just a quiet transition from one quarter to the next. That was how most meaningful changes concluded, not with recognition, but with absorption. The organization absorbed the new rules. The people absorbed the limits. Life continued. On the last workday before the break, I arrived early again. The building was nearly empty. Holiday lights blinked faintly along the reception desk. I sat at my desk and reviewed the final reports of the year. Everything balanced. I sent the last confirmation email, logged out, and shut down my computer. As I stood to leave, I paused, opened the desk drawer, and looked at the used book one last time. I left it there. Some lessons didn't need reminders. Outside, the air was cold and clear. I walked instead of taking the train, letting the city slow me down. Shop windows glowed, people hurried with packages and plans. Everyone was heading somewhere they believed mattered. At home, my son was waiting, sitting at the table with his latest project spread out, notes, diagrams, careful handwriting. He looked up when I came in. "Can you check this?" he asked. I sat beside him, read quietly, asked one question. He smiled and adjusted his work. That was enough. Later, after he went to bed, I stood by the window and watched the city settle. I thought briefly about the breakfast months ago, about silver folders and applause and symbolic gestures dressed up as values. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel vindication. I felt distance, the kind that comes when something no longer has leverage over you. People often imagine power as something you take, a moment you seize, a confrontation you win, but in reality, power is usually something you stop giving away. Quietly, without announcement. I hadn't corrected anyone. I hadn't argued. I hadn't demanded fairness. I had simply followed the process all the way to its natural conclusion. And in doing so, I'd learned something worth keeping. Dependability isn't invisibility, unless you allow it to be. I turned off the light, locked the door, and went to bed. The next morning would start the same way, and that was the point.